just now. And while we're waiting everyone to join, it'll be great if you could take the next 30 seconds, please, to answer this question for us. The question is, in your opinion, how important is climate change as a consideration for the average Indian person when deciding who to vote for? How important is climate change as a consideration for the average Indian person when deciding who to vote for? And you need to choose between very important, important, moderately important, of little importance, unimportant. I'll let you have the 30 seconds now. Right. We have quite a diverse range of results, but in some ways, decisively, people think that climate change is a consideration. And Aditya, maybe we'll touch base on this. Sorry, you're on mute.
Yeah, I was just checking the poll. Quite interesting.
Very interesting results. And I'm sure this will provide us enough fodder to come back to later. So I'll just read out the results here. Imagine unbearable levels of flooding, wildfires destroying our homes, water running out in cities. A world where land for agriculture is no longer usable and food starts to run out, where forests turn into deserts, where water becomes a luxury. Think of a young girl who can no longer go to school because she must walk miles along with her mother to fetch water for the family. And one day she falls into the clutches of human traffickers. Think of an old man forced on the streets when his home turns into a desert. Think of a poor farmer whose land is no longer harvestable and he eventually dies of hunger. Think of millions dying or being displaced as a result of devastating flooding. Am I painting a doomsday scenario? Something that's reserved for the next Hollywood flick? Sadly not. Many irreversible changes have already taken place. A few years ago, we were all enjoying Contagion at the cinemas. Now, we're living through it in the most literal terms. But speaking of COVID, amongst the many things it has taught us, and one does shine out, is that climate change and this pandemic are part of the same battle. And though COVID has caused tragic loss, the impact still, in the grand scheme of things, is a short-term one of economic loss, of the sad loss of lives, and of human health crisis. But if this was a small teaser, then climate change is going to be the full film. If our generation and the ones to come are to survive and to thrive, we need to take the future in our own hands. And that is why it gives me great pleasure to be able to have this very honest conversation on the climate emergency today. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I know people have joined us from all over the world. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sanam Arora. I'm the chairperson of the National Indian Students and Alumni Union in the United Kingdom. I am delighted to welcome you all to the India series, our flagship series of action-oriented conversations, and I'll come back to why these are action-oriented, in collaboration with King's Business School at King's College London. I'll be moderating today's conversation with Dr. Kamini Gupta, who is a lecturer of strategy and entrepreneurship at King's College London. So thank you, Kings, and thank you to Dr. Gupta for joining us. And now I am thrilled to welcome our guest for the discussion today. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Aaditya Thackeray, Cabinet Minister in the Government of Maharashtra, India, with the responsibility for environment, climate change, and tourism. While numerous discussions are now taking place about climate change, there is a distinct lack of the political perspective, which to us is absolutely critical. It is fundamental. How will large-scale climate action take place at the pace required and at the scale required if there is no political will? And that is why we're excited to have with us Mr. Thackeray today, because he is one of the few political leaders in India who's actually actively championed climate change initiatives. And he's taken steps to address some of the pressing issues in his state, which we'll get onto. Early in his tenure, if I may say so, he firmly prefixed development with sustainability, declaring 800 odd acres of land as reserve forest in the middle of urban Mumbai, cancelling work on a metro car shed that had led to the cutting of thousands of trees threatening the ecology of and impacting Adivasi settlements in the area. So, with that very brief introduction, Mr. Thackeray, welcome to the India series at King's Business School. I'm going to shortly request you to kick us off with your opening remarks. But before that, some very quick housekeeping points. This session is being recorded and it is being broadcast live on multiple media and social media platforms, including our press partner, NDTV. We welcome debate and dissent. Indeed, dissent is the bedrock of democracy. But while we welcome difference of opinion, we will not tolerate any form of hate speech, any form of abuse or misinformation on our platform. With that, Mr. Thackeray, thanks again for joining us, and may I please invite you to make your opening remarks.
Thank you, Sanam. Thank you, Ms. Gupta, for inviting me. And the very fact that I agreed to this conversation is because it's action oriented. And that's why I thought it's really important for us to be a part of a debate forum, a platform where we don't just speak, we don't just discuss, but hopefully we act upon whatever has been spoken, or whatever we like and take away from the threads of this discussion. I think while introducing, and I'm going to keep my opening remarks very short because I want to have a discussion and a two-way conversation rather than just my opening remarks. But one of the things I noticed very prominently really is, Sanam, when you were speaking and when you had your introductory remarks for what is climate change or what could be climate change, and you said imagine. For a moment, I thought I'd close my eyes and imagine of what you were saying. But then very honestly, I think it's time for us to not close our eyes. It's time for us to open our eyes, because the things that you said, extreme rainfall, extreme heat, women fetching water for a long, long distance and probably not going to school, or erratic weather events. All of that you've said is not something to be imagined anymore. All of that you said is not something for closed eyes anymore. If you open your eyes, if all of us open our eyes, we will find this happening in the lane next to us. We will find all of this happening in our own backyards. We'll find this happening in front of our eyes. We've always thought that climate change is a matter of the future. And whenever I get emails from friends or from people in climate change policy action, I think we speak about the next 50 years. We speak about the next 10 years. We speak about the last decade. And one thing this pandemic has taught me is basically we don't have a decade. We don't have 50 years. Climate change is happening around us even today. One of the figures I'd love to give all of you and to, for all of you to think upon is, in the year of the COVID pandemic, that's 2020, and it's not yet gone. But last year, we've had erratic weather events in the state of Maharashtra itself. I'm not looking at the world because, of course, there's a lot more happening around the world. But if you just focus in the state that I am, a part of the government, we had erratic weather events, right from hailstorms to unseasonal rainfall, to extended rainfall, to extreme cold weather events and extreme heat waves. We had a storm, we had a cyclone, we had heavy winds that we've never experienced before in the city of Mumbai, something to the tune of almost 110 kilometers per hour on an August day. And we've never seen this before. Neither have I, nor have anyone else seen this before, because I've lived 30 years in Mumbai, spent the entire monsoons in Mumbai, and it's one of my favorite seasons because, as right from childhood, I have beautiful memories of the monsoons. It's probably one of the best seasons to be in Mumbai, and you'd probably agree to that as well. But when we speak about monsoons now, and when we speak about monsoons as administrators, we have started worrying a little more about it, because erratic weather events have led us to give compensation to, be it farmers, to be it people living in cities or rural areas, be it professionals. It's to the tune of 13,000 crores in 2020. That is what we had to put in as compensation money for people from different walks of life. When we look at the monsoons now, about 120 days of monsoons that existed earlier before. And if you see, it started off on 7th of June and ended around September. Last year, we had monsoons starting off end of July and going on till the end of December. We had rains in January. It's never heard of to have rains in Mumbai in January on a regular scale, not for at least 2 or 3 days. And even if it's a light drizzle, it's unheard of. When we speak about summers, we've had temperatures ranging anything between 34 to 41 degrees Celsius. That's never been the case. And as a student of geography in school, we've always heard that cities like us by the coast have moderate weather temperatures. We've always had moderate climatic patterns. But today, if you see, it's not moderate anymore. Winters have become colder. And if you see around the world today, what's happening in Texas, what's happening in New Orleans, what's happened in Vancouver, Seattle last year, what's happened in Australia, this is not normal. And this is not something that's giving us a span of even half a decade to work on, because climate change, like I would argue, is today, and we are responsible largely for it. Now, the question here would be that what are we doing individually to A, curb climate change, B, can we really curb climate change and get into the mitigation act of it, or three, adaptation. But while we get into adapting to climate change, are we spurring it furthermore with a greater speed into the spiral that we cannot come out of, or can we both have mitigation measures and adaptation measures together? So I think that is something for all of us to ponder upon, and that's where, like the question you said, how relevant is climate change to politics? Most of our debates, most of our discussions, most of our talks that happen today around political scenarios, be it in my own state, be it in my own city, be it in our country, be it around the world, happen and revolve around the compensation that we have to give people because of climate change events and because of erratic weather events that we term as erratic. But is there a pattern in that erratic weather event? Is there a pattern that is called climate change? And can we really shift the focus from compensation to actually having climate resilient agriculture, climate resilient cities, climate adapting and mitigating behavior of humans that we need to act on? Because there is no other planet, as we know. We are sending rovers to other planets. We're sending people out to outer space. All of that is happening. But today, when we thought that most of our world would be developed by 2020, when we would have better healthcare infrastructure, better education, better scenarios in the countries around the world, we are learning yet again to wash our own hands, maintain a distance, and wear a mask on our face. And that's 2020 for us. All the degrees that we have achieved, all the doctorates, all the education, all the wisdom that we have achieved, with all great respect to that, we have been forced to learn how to wash our hands. Now the question is, how do we take all walks of a life, not just politics, be it corporates, be it NGOs, be it sports, be it just human action on a day-to-day basis for climate change mitigation and action? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Aaditya. Thanks, Sanam, for the introduction to the event. And thanks, Aaditya, for making time to join us in this conversation. As Sanam mentioned, the thing that most excites us is that while we tend to hear the perspective of the climate change expert and the politician and the academic, we hear much less about the political perspective, about the lawmakers' perspective, about a political leader's perspective. And they face challenges that are different from what we might understand. You gave us an insight on that very, very quickly in your opening remarks when you talked about the fact that one of the ways we think about climate change as a political leader or a lawmaker is centered around compensation, mitigation of those kinds of things, rather than climate resilience, rather than proactive action to stop some of these events happening. So I'm very glad you talked about that, because again, that I think is a very unique perspective that you gave us very, very quickly. And I agree that doomsday is here. So that is what you're etching out for us, given the erratic events that you mentioned in Maharashtra. So doomsday is already here. It's not even in the future. So I'm going to build on some of the things you've said and ask you two questions instead of one, if I may. So you talked about the need to shift the focus from compensation to climate resilience. So on the back of that, we would love to hear, and this is a question a lot of our participants also sent in, what are some key focus areas for you in Maharashtra? So what are some key areas that you want to work on in the next 4 years or so, specifically in terms of building climate resilience? And I will also combine that with another point, which is that, we can talk of Mumbai. Mumbai is not all of Maharashtra, certainly, but it is a peculiar city because people from all over India come to Mumbai with aspirations, with dreams of growing and raising their living standard. These are economic aspirations. At the same time, because of that, Mumbai has had to, face a lot of pressure on its natural resources, on the city as a whole in terms of congestion. And for you as a lawmaker, I assume that there is this focus on prioritizing economic development, on ensuring that the aspirations of the people who live in Mumbai are met with the need to balance sustainability as well. And there are, I'm sure, trade-offs in that, creating that balance. So we'd love to hear a little bit about what are some of your focus areas and how do you visualize this trade-off or this balance between economic development and sustainability, which very well applies to all of India, but we'll start with talking about Maharashtra.
Absolutely. But I think the baseline that we can take from here is the development has a prefix that we can put to it, which is called sustainable. And if you can just focus on sustainability, sustainable development in almost everything that we do today, everything that we plan today, I think that is really achievable, because some of the key areas that we focus on, and thankfully, because the Chief Minister, Mr. Aaditya Thackeray, is an environmentalist himself, a wildlife lover himself, a photographer himself. We really have focused on balancing environment with development. For example, I'll give you an example again of 2020, because that again is a very crucial year for us. We faced one of the toughest COVID challenges, also because we were counting our cases very openly, very transparently, very accountability. So I guess one of the first things that can be noticed in Maharashtra is investment in the state from various industries, right, from data centers to manufacturing industries, has been to the tune of almost 1,13,000 crores. Now that has been a huge achievement for Maharashtra, because we attracted the maximum foreign investment and maximum local investment into Maharashtra in a year of COVID, where things were almost hopeless as they could be for the industry. And we were wondering whether industry would revive again, when would it revive, and things like that. Along with that, we've had infrastructure work that's gone on constantly. We've never stopped a single day on infrastructure work. Wherever we had workers available, wherever we had workmen available, we've put in all those work hours and we've gone ahead with the infrastructure project. So if I have to mention a few, the Mumbai-Nagpur highway, the Chipi airport in Sindhudurg, the Mumbai Trans-Harbour link, which is going across actually a small bay. Then you also have the coastal road. You also have the coastal road north, and you have the Goregaon-Mulund link road. You've got a lot of flyovers and a lot of road works, dam works going on across the state that have never stopped even through the pandemic. But what can be really of great hope out here is the environment. And like I said, when we speak of balancing it, while our metro works were going on, and Sanam briefly mentioned about the Metro 3 issue, which was about the car shed, which we led a protest for a couple of years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago, we moved it from RA into another location. And actually that's given us the benefit of not just the environment, but the viability of the project has gone up from just ferrying about a lakh of people, 100,000 people a day, to almost attaching a crore of people across the entire MMR through one nodal point if we move it to the desired location that we want to move it from. So it saves the environment and gives us an added advantage of mobility. But going further, last year, we declared almost 329 hectares of a forest, 800 acres that is, of a forest in a city like Mumbai, which is bustling with people, which is ever growing. And you give us an inch and we'll grow a foot in that area. So that is the speed that Mumbai runs it. So, we really added that. We've added 10 conservation reserves. We added 2 more sanctuaries, making it to 50 in national parks and sanctuaries. I guess we've also focused, because what happens largely is when we speak about the environment and protecting our forests, we speak and tend to focus on the rural areas and the forest areas. We never speak about the urban areas. And we've launched a thing called urban thickets and urban forests. So with almost all our municipal wards coming together, Mumbai, Pune, Nagpur, Nasik, Thane, all these cities, be it Tier 1 cities, Tier 2 cities, we've launched a project called urban forestation. So wherever we have space that is lightly green, mildly green, we're adding urban thickets to Mewaki plantation. So I'll give you an example. Mumbai, for example, would have almost 300,000 trees planted by June this year. Many more cities would follow in. Last year, we've started this competition on Gandhi Jayanti, that's 2nd October, called Maji Vasundhara, which basically means my planet. And we're focusing on 5 areas of the environment, the 5 elements of nature. And we have brought in all our district collectors, the entire government machinery, to work on self-auditing and self-working on our carbon footprint. Because as governments, what we tend to do when we speak about climate change or carbon footprints is we tend to preach to the world about how you should move to EVs, how you should plant more trees, how you should not waste electricity or water. But we don't look at us internally as the government. So we've started auditing our own offices. We've started auditing our own travel distances. Can we do more video conferences? Can we move to EVs? Can we really build an ecosystem for electric mobility that is not being powered by coal, but by solar energy or renewable energy? So all these systems are being put in place. And by 5th of June this year, we would have a better picture in terms of actions that have gone in. I'm not saying the results will be out or results can be seen or felt within a span of a year. But if you go around Mumbai, I can take you to places or Pune, where we're working on carbon neutral cities, where our urban thickets are growing at a greater speed because of this new plantation method called Miyawaki. Two more examples I'd like to give you in terms of balancing infrastructure and development along with environment. The Mumbai-Nagpur highway, which actually connects most of our districts in the state of Maharashtra, will be a huge connectivity boon for us. We're also getting 24 cities along it, planned new cities, greenfield cities. I was chasing the department with a funny radical idea, but it's turned out to be coming out well. The idea was to solarize the highway, and I was pushing for it since 2016. The other day, I met the MD of the project, and he's conveyed to me that almost 230 megawatts of solar energy would be generated from solarizing that highway, and we're going ahead with that. The Mumbai-Pune highway is through a catchment area of extreme high monsoon because of going through the Western Ghats and Sahyadris. And it is also a solar catchment area. So we're putting solar energy there as well, plus rainwater harvesting, creating another reservoir of water for probably areas around. One of the dams, the Middle Vaitana Dam, we're going for electrification through the dam. And of course, it was made to supply water to the city of Mumbai. But this year, we're about to go for the foundation laying ceremony very soon. We're raising about 40 megawatts of electricity through hydel energy, and 80 megawatts of energy through floating solar energy on the dam. If that works, we'll go for all our dams to have floating solar energy. So I think these are some of the things that we're really working on and balancing our environment with development. And finally, it comes down to human habits. And one of the things that gives me hope is really that most of our people are realizing what climate change is, not as a concept probably as climate change, but again, whatever is happening around, they're feeling it's not right. Something is changing. Something has changed in the weather patterns. So we start off with awareness drives. We start off with campaigns. In the year of 2017, we had a daily waste generation in the city of Mumbai at 10,000 metric tons a day. Through campaigns of segregation, through little carrot and stick method, saying we won't pick up garbage that's beyond 100 kgs, which is not segregated. In a span of a year and a half, we got it down to about 6,500 metric tons a day. And that was about only 20% of the people really following it. And now we're increasing the campaign. COVID took us back a little bit, but we're going to start off again. So these are some of the things that we're really focusing on.
Thank you for those very pertinent examples, Aditya. It's really good to see this really in action rather than, just being snippets that often one hears from various people. So thank you for shining a light on those. I want to touch on this point you made about this radical idea that you brought up. And then, with your radical in the sense that I guess you didn't expect it to get taken up, but then it did, and, it's delivering. So my question, Aditya, is very much to probe that a little, which is you may encounter, we are millennials, but you may encounter people, stakeholders within the government, but also outside who you have to work with, who may not quite see this issue in the same way as we do it, the same way as, a millennial typically does. Do you see that? Do you often have this sort of fight internally sometimes, within the government or with external stakeholders? And then how do you deal with that, if so?
I think largely more than the belief system, because most of our government offices are actually, more in tune with climate change, because they also get reports from villages and different districts about what is happening out there. And they've seen in their career, which is almost my age most of the times, around 25 to 30 years, where they've seen climate changing. They've seen things change on the ground level. And some of them really are hardworking and, they inspire to go more. The battle really is in between the will to do things and the technology that is available. For example, I'll give you a small example. In 2012, 2013, when we wanted to bring in, again, a mad idea of mine, a crazy idea where I wanted to start off with electric buses for public transport in Mumbai. The buses back then we brought in 2014, they landed in Mumbai. You had 8 hours of charge and about 120 kilometers of running time. And in the city of Mumbai, 120 kilometers, even in a short span, seeing the traffic is not enough. Nonetheless, we went ahead with that, 6 buses back then. 2016, we got about 40 buses, and you had 8 hours of charge and almost 180 kilometers of a running time. And now, as we go further, it's come down to about 3 hours of charge and 250 kilometers of running. So as we move ahead with time, I think things are evolving at a rapid pace. So that's giving us hope. And that's where really the fight between the departments and the technology lies, that, okay, this is a crazy idea. This is something that is probably implementable, or what about the technology that's available? And thankfully, you have a technology that's catching up. And like I said, any technology that's coming in, of course, within the government, we have these push and pull factors, something that hold you back, some things that push you ahead. You also have a sense of optimism and pessimism that really balances of government, which is really necessary because you don't want to do the wrong thing and end up in a hurry somewhere. But I guess that balance of the willpower of the political side or the willpower of the administrative side, that will take you somewhere. So that's surely moving ahead.
That's very interesting to hear. So that's exactly what came to my mind as well, what Sanam said when you talked about the radical idea that surely not everyone is on the same page on this, and it might be challenging for you to drum up support from various stakeholders. And you, as obviously as a member of the government, have many stakeholders to manage here. People inside your own political party who may think about this in a more traditional manner. People in other ministries who may, so for example, the Ministry of Energy and your work is sort of complementary, but also there may be differences of opinion, people in the private sector. So there is really a whole range of stakeholders to manage here. And that brings me to another question, Aaditya, which is, like we mentioned, this is important because we're getting the perspective of a political leader and a lawmaker. Now, when I talk to climate change experts, they say that this is a systemic issue and everyone needs to come together to solve this. No one entity alone can do all of this. And the government's role is certainly brought out as being very, very important. But we tend to think of the government as a monolithic entity, but the government is not a monolithic entity. It is made up of people like you and many of your colleagues. And each of these, each of you have your own challenges when you're trying to push this agenda forward. So I wanted a very human perspective from you as a leader who cares about this issue. What are the challenges that you face, whether it is about convincing stakeholders, whether it is about managing center-state relationships, whether it is about dealing with state utility companies, or finding resources for this in an already cluttered budget. So what are some of the challenges you face as a lawmaker?
I think the primary challenge is where the priorities really lie, and how do we define our priorities? What do we define as development? Like I said, it sort of balances between always of whether we really want to have a dam because there's a drinking water problem, or can we do with rainwater harvesting and percolation pits? What is faster? There will always be pressure from both sides, and I tend to deal with both ends because one is tourism, where there are some people who actually want to cut across the hills and run through the tunnels and break down hills to make hotels or whatever. And the other is basically where you have the environmentalists. And the good part is really the amount of legislators, the amount of members of parliament, the amount of officers, the amount of common people who write to me in terms of a lake being probably polluted and wanting to take action on that, and probably a river where you have floating dead fish or you have sewage being let into it. And to take action on that is huge. And the pressure on me is building up to act. I think that is one of the best things that I'm facing in my ministry, about the pressure to act. Whereas on the other side, of course, it is also the same legislators, the same members of parliament, who also have to voice the industries who are well set in those areas for the last 20, 30 years, who have also been letting out polluted sewage water or discharge into a river or a lake, and have employed, say, 1,000 or 2,000 people in that district, and they don't want to let go of that either. So how do you maintain the balance? And quite frankly, that's where the carrot and stick method really comes in, and you have to push for compliances. Thankfully, on paper, in terms of our laws, in terms of compliances, in terms of waste management rules, in terms of discharge standards, we've got some of the finest rules on paper. My challenge really is to get people, rather these polluting people, to comply to that. I think that is where the challenge lies. And like I said, the amount of pressure that is building up for me to act is, making me feel that I'm lucky in a place where at least a lot of people today, right from the most far-flung areas to a city like Mumbai or Pune or Nagpur, have awareness of what is happening around. So that is really good. Again, in the sense of, whether to act today or tomorrow, what I really believe is a balance of hosh and josh is needed. And, if we can find a mid path ahead, that would really take us forward.
And, speaking of the challenges, and you mentioned the fact that you need, the technology is giving you hope, humans are giving you hope. But I guess what might be a setback to that hope is if there is no budget to implement, things we want to implement. There is obviously a value for money factor. And how do you include climate priorities into that sort of calculation of value for money? And so there's a lot of, I am going to start taking questions as well. And one of the questions that's come from a student at St. Andrews is about financing all of this. Where will the money come from in what is, as Kamini was also saying, an already pretty chaotic budget, pretty cluttered budget? There isn't enough. India is still a developing country. We do have a far way to go. So where does the money come from? That's one question. And the second part to this question, Aditya, is very much, what about ESG investing in India, environmental social governance investing, impact investing in the UK? And I work in finance myself, and I work with a lot of asset managers where this is the focus. ESG is the future of fund management, and we know that, and it's now about implementing it. Where is India on that journey? So those two questions, please.
So if you see, there is a little discord I strike with, thinking of allocating a particular budget or large incentives to climate mitigation or adaptation measures, because it's something like this: that if you're faced with a situation like COVID and you have to step out into your street, would you want the government to pay you £5 to wear a mask and step out, or would you wear it for your own self and move around? I think most of the climate action measures in terms of mitigation or adaptation really start from all of us individually. If we can take small measures like just switching off of the lights in a room that you don't need lights, or walking a small distance where you don't really need a vehicle to go on, or if you can use public transport, if you can carpool, if you can save your water, if you can have your own rainwater harvesting or percolation pits within the society or your building compound, I don't think you need major incentives for that. People living around garbage dumps today or dumping grounds would tell you that segregation really in your own housing societies, in your own buildings, in your own flats, would really save you a lot more effort and money rather than being paid an incentive. So budgets always have been there. Traditionally, if you see from the history of governance, you've always had budgets for a lot of things in terms of development, in terms of healthcare, education, all of that. How much have we achieved from just allocating money in the budget? How much of that has been spent or really utilized for a good cause into 100%? B, would habits cost us money or incentives? I think we've come to a point today where brownie points or incentives wouldn't really matter because it's for our own survival. If we don't do the things that are needed as habit changes, we're not going to survive, as a very pessimist view, but of course, not survive in the way we're surviving today. It's going to be a huge shift in our own living ways, be it migration, be it moving from one country to another, moving from a state to another, one place to another geographically. The geography is going to change. The future of our world is going to change. And if we start looking for budget allocations today, we're just looking at the wrong side. We have to look at our own selves. For example, India, 1.4 billion people, if we make one good habit a day, one small effort a day is going to impact the world. Likewise, every country around the world, if we just change our own habits, and I know it's a lot of preaching that's going on, but I've started off doing that myself. I just walk into any government office today and I'm like, why do we need these lights? Is anyone sitting in here? Or our conferences, for example, when we have ministerial conferences, we have something on the screen and the same presentation is a 50-pager spiral bound copy in front of me. And I'm like, do we really need it? Because that's going to go to the shredder later. So for 15 minutes of a presentation, we don't need copies. So I think these are some of the things that we can really focus on.
Thanks for that, Aaditya. A couple of more things I want to pick up on. So you mentioned one of your big challenges is to get polluted.
I hope all the finance ministers around the world hear that. They'll be very happy with what I've just said.
We'll make sure they hear it. Even if they haven't, we'll make sure it gets to them. So you talked about, that one of your big challenges is getting polluters to act. And I do think that the private sector is a big partner in this. So I want to hear from you how you see the private sector's role in helping the government and your role in supporting them. So it's also hard for them, like you said, they have their own financial bottom lines to work towards, and the government could perhaps make something simpler for them. So, green energy, for example, using solar powered electricity or electrical vehicles the premium on this can be reduced by some simple measures by the government. And that brings me to the second question, which a lot of people have asked, which is your view on the role of solar power in the state. You talked about the national highway thing, your radical idea, which was about using solar power, which is great. And I also appreciated that you looked inwards and said, we usually tell others what to do, but we also need to look inside and change some of our habits. But how can we take solar power more mainstream in Maharashtra? So other than these kinds of infrastructure projects, how can you divert capacity towards solar? Is there any plan towards that as well? So a bit, basically questions about the private sector and solar power essentially.
Right. I'll just break the answers into a couple of points so that we just don't skip anything. I think started off with solar. In the month of January, the state of Maharashtra has passed a cabinet note and to the effect of really making solar power the next big thing for our state, because for us, renewable energy is something which is really important. The government of Maharashtra and the chief minister, the deputy chief minister, the energy minister, all of us believe that energy transition is the next big thing, because if you look at the resources, if you look at the way we're moving ahead, and India being a part of the Solar Alliance, our commitment to the world is about 25% of our energy needs to be fulfilled by 2025 as through renewable energy. So we're largely focusing on that. Maharashtra especially has a couple of funnels for wind energy. We've got a couple of existing dams, not creating the new ones, but just talking of the existing ones where we can go for hydel or floating solar. We've got a lot of highways that can be solarized. Rooftops and rooftop solar is quite a debate here because it's one of the best things to do. But again, do we really have the space on our rooftops considering the population density and the smaller homes and rooftops that we have? But if you look at most of Maharashtra, areas like northern Maharashtra, Vidarbha, Marathwada, these areas where many of our farm fields are barren and dry because of climate change events now, that is where we could really bring in the farmers, utilize the lands for solar energy. One of the challenges we still face with solar really is the storage capacity of the batteries and the size of the battery. So we've been, speaking to different companies around the world on that and how can we really put it onto the grid real time and balance off our night requirements along with the day requirements. So that is one of the things that we're really focusing on in terms of solar. In terms of the corporate responsibility in the private sector, I think we need to break down the things into two simple things. One is about the corporate responsibility, towards the environment as a corporate identity. Then yes, we have to ensure that we have 100% compliance with our pollution standards, or rather pollution mitigation standards, be it liquid discharges or solid discharge or aerial discharge, smoke, or whatever. It has to be in compliance with whatever pollution control norms are. And that is what we're focusing on. And we're working closely with the Industrial Development Corporation, the MIDC, on that. So we're working from MIDC to MIDC, our special economic zones. We're working closely with the corporates on that. Let me also tell you that when we brought in the act for banning single-use disposable plastic in Maharashtra in 2017, 2018, a lot of corporates came forward. And I thought it was quite cool and fashionable for all of them to celebrate World Environment Day, and they celebrate with a lot of vigor even today. And they come up with reports about the compliance for environment, be it carpooling, be it walk to work measures, be it work from home measures now, and the compliance to pollution control measures. So largely the big corporates, the middle-sized corporates, even a lot of small scale industries are focusing on this. The ones that are not really adapting to these measures or adopting these measures are the ones off the radar. And that's what we're focusing on now. And the first thing would be a dialogue with them, because I think primarily getting them to understand what they're contributing to is what is really important. What I've been speaking to a lot of large corporates is all of them hire a huge amount of human resource. Now, like I said, in terms of corporate compliance, that's one thing. The other thing is the amount of people that you've hired directly and indirectly. If each of them really starts focusing on their own habit, their own deed every single day of what they will contribute to our carbon footprint, that could be a huge impact too, because that's an organized sector. We know how many people work, where they live, where they come from, and where they go. The amount of work hours they have, the amount of holidays or vacations, and how they can utilize that to contribute to climate change action and mitigation. I think that is what we can really focus on. So Maji Vasundhara, the next step is to involve the diplomatic corps in Maharashtra, the NGOs, the corporate sector, company by company, and again, the ancillaries or the attaches to the government, like the police or the paramedics, the nurses, the doctors. So we're really focusing on numbers as a targeted sense of idea to get where we can in terms of what our daily habits could be.
Thank you. That is again really insightful to hear of all the different measures you're taking and the neurodiversity of the measures, if I may say so, trying to tackle every different aspect of it. So that's really inspiring. I think one question we're getting a lot of on Facebook as well as on Zoom is, what can Mumbaikars do to help you on the ground grassroots level? And to take that further, I'll add a second part to that question, which is, what is the role of the youth, Aditya, in all of this? And do you see some form of an urban-rural divide? Do you see some form of any other divide? Do you see a youth, non-youth divide as well? And so what really is the role of Gen Z and the millennials whose future this is about, really?
I think Mumbaikars or any city in the world, and especially any city in Maharashtra, one of the things that we really need to tackle right away is solid waste management, or rather waste generation. Do we really need to generate the amount of waste that we're generating today? If we're picking up a sandwich to work, or if we're picking up something in a shop next to our home, do we really need a shopping bag? Do we really need to carry something which is in a bag, or you could take it in your hand? Likewise, every single day, can we in our own homes or housing societies, because most of us live in housing societies or chawls, can we segregate our waste more responsibly and ensure that only little waste goes to our dumping grounds? I think that will be the biggest contribution of Mumbaikas, and I have great hope from that, because we've shown the way by reducing it by 4.5 metric thousand tons. So we can go ahead in that. I think that is really important. Two, I know a lot of us use public transport, so I'm not going to focus on that, because buses are full, cabs are full, railways are full. A lot of us even have started walking or cycling to work. So that is something that has become a habit. In terms of probably looking at our own habits, can we, like I said, use our electricity and water responsibly? And can we have at least one plant or sapling planted in our own housing society or compound, probably as we go closer to the monsoon? So that is something we could really focus on. And not litter our city, but most of the Mumbaikars, they don't litter the city. They help our 30,000 sanitation workers by not littering the city. 90% of the citizens don't do that. So I think that is really important. In terms of youth and not youth, I think every generation has had youth, and every generation that has seen youth has had hopes from youth. So or millennials. But one of the differences that I've seen today is this whole waste generation culture came around the 80s and 90s, where the waste exponentially increased. And when I brought in this whole concept of in Maharashtra, with the government of Maharashtra back then, for a ban on single-use disposable plastic, like many countries around the world, our grandparents' generation and their friends and their whole generation actually started telling me about how back then, in their good old days, they didn't have plastic bags. They had jute bags or cotton bags to take back home. They didn't have multi-layered plastic packaging. They had either a paper wrapping or something like that. So they started, reminiscing of their own days. And so they've seen the days without a lot of waste generation. And we are seeing the requirement for days without a lot of waste generation. I think it's our parents' generation, which has seen both as well. So a lot of us have been seeing it, yes. But when we speak about urban and rural divide, a lot of us, like I said, when we speak about rainwater harvesting and percolation, when we speak about planting trees or afforestation, we tend to focus on the rural areas where you already have a lot of systems, have a lot of culture of living in sync with nature. It's the urban areas that we really need to focus on. And if we can do that, I think we've won the battle halfway through.
That's a very insightful point, I think, Aditya, because something that I keep thinking about is that there's a fair amount of heterogeneity within Maharashtra and in India. Rural, urban is one type, and these voters may care about different things, and these places present different challenges and different opportunities for you as well. Now, one of the questions, and you've talked a bit today about what individuals can do, the kind of habits they can change. You said it's all about habits at the end of the day. And what kind of habits are low-hanging fruits, so to say, that can change and have an impact. Now, a few different questions in the Q&A box here are touching upon that. And the question from them is that, but how do you change these habits? How do you change habits that are well-entrenched habits? And you talked very briefly about carrot and stick, but maybe you can elaborate a bit on that. But people are also asking about intersection with things such as education, awareness, or even healthcare. So all in the gambit of how do you actually make change within these habits? What kind of measures do you use, and what might be the role of incentives and penalties and education and other kinds of things that you can draw upon?
I think education, of course, yes, it is a major tool, and I strongly believe in education because it's one of the finest ways to enlighten a generation and build its future. But having said that, all of us on this panel discussion who's gone through school at a certain point has had environmental science as a subject, and we've always learned about civics and environmental science, EVS that we called in Indian systems, about why we shouldn't litter, what is it to go to a dumping ground, what is it happening as a climate change. We've always learned about that, but we've learned it from the perspective of just another subject that we are not going to really be marked on or judged upon, and we've just left it there in the back of our memory. I think habits also start when you have a warning bell that you can, clearly see. So, for example, if you go to a doctor and you do some tests and you see your cholesterol high or you see your weight increasing or something like that, and the doctor tells you, look, this is not good. You better start jogging tomorrow. You better start controlling what you eat tomorrow onwards. You are going to change your habit inevitably without realizing that you've learned something like this as physical training in school. Likewise, I think COVID should be a warning bell for us, or sitting at home and looking at whatever erratic systems that have changed around us, weather patterns that have changed around us. I think that is largely a warning bell. And if we can start off with our own self and start just telling someone else, a close circle of friends, saying, okay, let's not litter, let's start segregation of waste, let's make it a cool thing, let's make a WhatsApp group of people who really want to do something for the environment, in turn something for our own selves. I think we could start off like that, and that's going to have a replicate effect around the world.
And just taking this one step further than Aditya, do you feel, you said in a very positive way that you feel a lot of pressure to do something and to act, and that's why you feel lucky to hold the portfolios you hold. Obviously, there's global pressure. We've got the COP26 coming up that the UK is hosting with its presidency this year. We've got this urgency. Bill Gates has just released a book on this topic. So, there's a lot of global pressure building up, and I see that. But a lot of the questions that the audience is asking, and one from me as well, is very much, in India, we still have it's a very vibrant democracy, and we vote on so many different issues, and sometimes we vote on religion still, we vote on caste still, we vote on things that we really, in my own personal opinion, ought not be voting on. How do you then, from an electoral perspective, what are the challenges you see on that front? There may well be none. If that's the answer, then that's a brilliant answer. But are there electoral challenges around this? And if so, how does that stop you or maybe discourage politicians in some ways, not you necessarily, but more generally, from doing the right thing to address this emergency?
So Sanam, the answer I gave before this in terms of, the habits and do we really need the carrot and stick? And like I said, if each of us starts doing something now in a population of almost 7 billion people, it may sound like a very utopian answer. And it's something of disbelief that, okay, tomorrow we're going to wake up and start changing our habits. We're going to start, auditing ourselves in electricity, water, when we're looking at our office schedules, if you're running late, if we have, projects to complete. So yes, it is utopian. And likewise, to start off a political discussion, I'm really thankful to you. And, I was really surprised when we spoke about this, that there will be no other political questions and only focus on environment, because even today when we have interviews, largely to do with my department as well, we normally move into politics of it with regular mainstream news channels. And, again, the whole answer is really to start off small, baby steps. Even though there is no time, we need to take baby steps. And how do we make this conversation of climate change really simple for the people at the grassroots and the highest of offices understand that it's relevant to them? For example, when we speak about this in terms of, and we also tend to have this little arrogance as urban, politicians, that probably people in the rural areas won't understand what climate change is. But when we start touring in the rural areas, we realize that they have more of a hands-on experience with climate change, because it is their crops that are getting damaged, their crops that are facing the need for compensation, their fields that are getting damaged and unusable every year. So they're the ones who keep telling us about how we should focus on drip irrigation. They're the ones who are telling us about why we don't need chemical fertilizers in our fields. They're the ones who are telling us about why the summers were harsher last year and not this year, or probably vice versa. I think What we really need to do is go into them and start off conversations, maybe town halls, maybe just sitting with them. And many more responsible people like us, or probably crazy people like us who think we are warriors for climate change, mitigation and action, adaptation. We need to have many more forums in colleges, in schools, in political circles where we ensure that the people know that the differences that are being made to the life, positive or negative, is because of a thing called climate change. We need to make climate change much more simple and relevant to them. It's only then that can really, what we can really focus on and make it a part of mainstream electoral politics. And like I said, that's why even today, for me, even though most of our manifestos have been about climate change and SDGs as well, to make it into a political conversation even today is very, very difficult. I'm going to attempt a climate change conference where I'm going to call all the legislators, I'm going to call all the members of parliament, tell them what climate change is about and how it's relevant to their own constituency and how they will face the wrath of people if they don't work on this. But I mean, that's a great hope. And yes, the pressure is building up from pressure groups, from people who are aware. Like just today, I saw this message from a group of an environmental organization that's sitting on a hunger strike somewhere about 800 kilometers from Mumbai for a lake and it being polluted. So obviously we're acting on it. We've called for a meeting on it and how do we act on it? But again, like I said, we need to have climate change simplified into what is happening around us.
That's a really interesting point, Aditya, because like you say, we may think that rural areas, etc., people in rural areas don't understand climate change, but they actually bear the effects of it, and they do understand climate change. They use different terms to talk about it. And I found two of the things you said very, very interesting. One about building ownership, sort of, with different ministries and telling them how is this relevant for you and in your work, which I think is sort of key. Showing them what stake they have in this. And the other I found very interesting is about local participation and co-creation of ideas rather than, and it's interesting to hear you say that as a lawmaker, that instead of me just telling them what you should do, asking them, okay, let's have these sabhas and let's have these community meetings and ask what are the actual solutions you're already applying, how can we improve them, and co-creating the solutions. So some great insights there. But we're nearly out of time, so I'm going to call on Sanam to take us, like you said again, that it's exciting for you that we are going beyond just the conversation towards the action. So let's start on that agenda now.
Yes, absolutely. And I was really glad, that we've touched based upon, that you've agreed to join us for this action-oriented conversation. And I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to talk to the audience about what we mean when we say action orientation. And then I'll call on you, Aditya, to announce the next part of that. But essentially, and let me just put this up on my screen so hopefully everyone can see it. We at the NISAO and at King's College London, King's Business School are incredibly aware that there are so many valuable discussions happening. And indeed, that is conversations are the genesis of change. And so that is really the starting point. But we want to go beyond that. We want to go into action. We want to make sure that as the diaspora, as well as students outside of India, as young professionals outside of India, we can actually really contribute to addressing some of these pressing questions. And so at the India series, one of the unique things we do is we've picked a couple of topics. You saw when we launched the India series in September that we had Kiran Shaw talking to us about healthcare and digitizing that. At the end of that, she left you with a question with a number of you are now researching. So we're going to do the same today. This is the second in our India series of events and a very, very pertinent topic of climate change. So on climate change, we're calling upon Aditya today to announce a research question. When he does that, applications will open. Some of you have already been writing to us about it, so thank you for doing that. And I know about 100 or so of you have already said you're interested. But for those who don't, let me just give you a quick overview. This is going to be a research project championed by Aditya. It's a unique opportunity to become part of this. The skills you need to get involved are one or more of the following. There are opportunities in writing, in storytelling, in being able to communicate the research we've come out with, in doing the actual research, of course, and across project managing of these projects. Once this happens, we will take the output of all of these discussions, climate change, healthcare I mentioned before, and a number of others to come in, and this will be published as an edited volume. So you will have become a participant in this very special research project, which I think is pretty unique in the world, and it doesn't really happen elsewhere. We've had participants working on the first one from, ranging from Singapore to the UK, to India, to the Americas. And so we hope to keep that diversity from the Indian diaspora as well as from within India involved. It's a great opportunity to enhance your CV. It's a fairly unique thing to do. And finally, it helps us give back to our country, even when we're not physically in the country, because you know what, just like climate change knows no borders, globalization knows no borders, Indian students outside know no borders, and we can always contribute to nation building. So with that, Aaditya, if you would please announce the question you'd like students and young professionals to explore, please, I'd be grateful.
So Sanam, when we were first discussing of what to put and we were brainstorming about it, obviously we had a lot of ideas in terms of, about climate change action and mitigation in terms of how we can bring people on board and things like that. But I think the question I'm going to really put would sound really simple, but it's going to be probably one of the most difficult, because to get politicians to do anything is going to be difficult. So the question really is, how do you make climate change mitigation and adaptation action plans a part of mainstream electoral and political conversation? And how do you ensure that political parties really follow up on that and act upon these measures? So I think that's the question.
Thanks, Aditya. Of course, I mean, if this is the lawmakers and political leaders' perspective, then this question is sort of a natural outcome of that. So it makes a lot of sense, and we've touched today in different ways about the choices of the electorate and about the priorities of the electorate. And I think this question connects very well with that. How do you make climate change a part of the mainstream political conversation? And how do you sort of bring the electorate into this conversation as well, which I think is equally important. And I think, I mean, like you said as well, Aditya, but this is true for any sphere in life, that incentives are what make people work. So if you make this a part of the incentives of your MPs, of the people who are, who want to represent you in their constituencies and your constituencies, that's when they are going to really act upon it. So it's upon you as well as people, even while we're all doing our individual contributions of recycling more and using reusable, masks and reducing our usage of single-use plastics and all of that. But what we need to do is really go beyond that. The large effect will come by holding our MPs accountable and by making our decisions, our electoral decisions, based on these factors. So I want to leave you a little bit with that. And thanks, Aditya, again, because I think it's a very, very important question for us to start thinking about. And as Sanam said, we are excited to work with all of you. We are excited to contribute to India in whatever way we can, in the most humble way we can. And we are excited to do this together. So any of you who would like to participate in this, please do write to us. And I'm sure there's something we can do together. Final thank you. Thanks very much, Aditya, for participating today and making time. It was very, very insightful to hear your views. For me, at least, if I look online, it's hard to find the kind of things that you've talked to me about compensation, moving from compensation to mitigation, to actual resilience, climate resilience. Some of the things you talked about, forming habits, some of the things you talked about, co-creation with local communities. So it's been a very, very good conversation for me. And thanks to Nisao as well for sort of putting this together with us at King's College and King's Business School. Just to end with, we have another exciting event in a month, which is on education. As Sanam said, we are trying to cover all of the important foundation pillars of making India strong. We've talked about healthcare. We talked today about climate change. And in a month from now, on 25th March at 1 p.m., we will talk about education. And the details for that will be out very soon. And we look forward to seeing some of you then as well. And thank you very much, Aditya.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Aaditya. Really.
It's a pleasure being here, and thank you so much. Look forward to many more conversations and the action after that in terms of working on things together and moving forward together. Thank you.
Thank you.